Welcome in to the horse race. For those of you who are new, my name is Daniel Vaughn. I am the host of this show, and we cover everything related to polling, the latest election news, and sort of where the election is going to go. If you once you've had a look at the polling, had a look at the latest news cycles, and kind of factored everything together, and so try to make sure that you're well rounded on where all the polling is, where the news cycle is headed, and where the election is headed as we head into election day. Because very quickly getting here into the very last stretch here. We've got about a month and a half, about 50 days left in this election cycle here in the United States. So it's getting real tight. So we're going to cover a few different things tonight. I'm going to go over a piece written by Liam Donovan. He's one of the best Republican strategists that I've ever read on a lot of these things. He's very even keel. He covers a lot of things sort of with a realistic point of view. I'm trying to give you sort of the best vantage point that you can get to understand where everything's are, just kind of cutting through all of the partisan haze. So I'm going to go through a piece that he wrote that sort of lays out the state of the race, where we are, where things are headed, the best case for both candidates. From there, we're going to go look at the actual polling itself, going to the Real Clear Politics average, check out all the different things that are there. And then I'm going to go into the Teamsters decision to not endorse any candidate. They're one of the largest unions in the country, and their decision to not endorse Kamala Harris, specifically in this case, was very interesting. And it was interesting for twofold. One, because they actually released some polling that they did internally on who they should endorse, and also because of some of the language that they used in that decision. It's pretty telling what they decided to do. I think it kind of suggests the leadership was leaning one way, and the actual people underneath the union, the people working day in and day out in the Teamsters Union, sort of have different leanings than what their leadership might say. So that's sort of a broad overview of what we're going to cover tonight. I'm also going to touch on some of the decisions by the Federal Reserve and kind of talk about where that's leading, and we'll cover that at the very end. So, start off, I want to introduce you to Liam Donovan. Like I said, he's a Republican strategist and one of the best out there. He's quoted a lot in National Review. He was recently interviewed by Puck News. You see him in a lot of the major publications when they need a Republican strategist to talk to. They'll go to Liam Donovan, and he has a Substack called Donovan's Reef, and he sort of gave an an overview of the entire race, which I thought it was short, but it was good and kind of gives you an overview of where things are. So the first point that he brings up is that this thing is close, really close. So you may have seen a lot of polling recently suggesting that Harris is ahead. But once you start throwing a lot of that into the averages, he uses similar things that I do. He's got 538, Silver Bulletin, Vote Hub here. They all suggest that, in the Electoral College, looking at Harris 276 to Trump 262. You look at Real Clear Politics, Trump has a 281 lead in the Electoral College. Split ticket, Harris has a lead there. So he's been looking more at Nate Silver, Vote Hub, and Real Clear Politics. I've been looking at mostly at Nate Silver and Real Clear Politics. If you follow this channel or any of my writing, I use mostly those two. Everyone has their own mix here. Like I said, I've ignored 538 because I don't think their model is useful right now. But if you're using these, you kind of come away with the understandable idea that the race is really close. And he points out the same thing that I have, which is that the tipping point state is Pennsylvania. That is the key point that you want to know the most important state in this election. It's going to be Pennsylvania, because you tell me where Pennsylvania goes, I can probably tell you how the outcome is going to go in the night. So that's what everybody's going to be watching election night. That's what we know now. That's what we know it's going to be an election night. So you look at all these things, and they're all telling you the same thing. The race is close. It's probably going to be like 2016 and 2020, where you're looking at a race that's going to be decided by under 100,000 votes sprinkled across a handful of swing states. So that's the first main takeaway, and I think it's the most obvious one, in that it's a very tight race. It hasn't always been tight. Obviously, when Biden was in the race, Donald Trump was showing runaway margins. We've seen Kamala Harris peak, and that's his next point here. Harris has peaked, but she's steadied the ship, because what we saw in polling, and he brings this up here, is that she sort of coasted up to some very high points in her polling, but that started to ebb down as we saw that sugar high eke away. She's bounced back up a little bit here in the post-debate world. We don't have a lot of polling yet showing what's happening since the second assassination attempt of Donald Trump. We're going to have to wait probably another week or two to get an idea of how that's being processed by everyone. But the debate helped her out by a point or two, and so she sort of, bounced back a little bit. But even with all this, her sugar high is gone, and so you're starting to see the gravity of the race reassert itself. And so that's bringing us back to the close race that he brings up here. He gives a bull case for both of them. The best case he has for Harris, she's a very clear narrow polling leader. So if she's able to execute her campaign strategy, if she's able to keep that polling lead and execute that across the battleground states, she's going to be sitting in a pretty spot. I think he brings up a good point here about her having a motivated base, a good resource advantage, and she's got a significant edge game on the ground. So Harris is absolutely getting just tons of money poured into her campaign, into her PACs. That is starting to shadow now what Donald Trump had. And she also has a significant edge in the ground game. Means people knocking on doors and reminding people to vote. That's always a very important aspect as you get into the last stretch of the campaign. Donald Trump has not invested as much in the ground game. He didn't in 2016 and he didn't in 2020 either. So this is being left a lot to the local state Republicans parties. They're having to do it. So, for instance, Georgia, you've got a very good program there, but it's going to be run by the state, less so by the Trump campaign. Trump's likes doing these like rallies and driving media and social media attention. And he wants to remind people to go vote that way. So Harris is going to be the one out there door knocking. You're not going to see as much effort from the Trump campaign on that front. The bull case for Trump is pretty much what I've been saying for the last 3 to 6 months here, which is you expect him to overperform what his polling is here in 2016 and 2020. He's had, if you look at the Harris campaign, as Liam puts here, she's had a flawless rollout, 2 months of great media coverage, and she barely leads. And in some of these cases, she's trailing. So all of this good press, all of this goodwill that she's getting, and still, this is a very close race. It's pretty much right where you'd want to be if you're Donald Trump, because you would expect things to drift your way the closer we get towards election day. The fourth point he brings up, which is good. I haven't really covered the Senate here, but it is important to note here that he sees the Senate slipping away from Democrats, and that's because Republicans are expected now to win the Montana race, which has been close, but it is now leaning more and more towards Republicans, and that's going to be a pickup. Republicans are also going to pick up the West Virginia seat, and so that's going to give them two. Right now, the polling's not great in Arizona, but that's going to be a hold for Democrats since they already hold that seat. So you're looking at Republicans taking over the Senate. That's going to get roasting on election night because the House is still expected to be pretty narrow. So if Donald Trump were to win, he would likely win holding both the House and the Senate. It'd be very narrow margins on both sides, but it would be like in 2016 when he came into power when he had both houses. And then last point he makes, which I think is great here too, less than 50 days out. And some of these states are already starting to get into early voting. You've got Pennsylvania and Virginia, where you're going to have ballots starting to be shipped out here soon. So people are going to start casting votes here. We've got the first debate, and people are actively going to start casting ballots in the 2024 election. So this is a great Substack. So if you listen to podcasts, you can check out the Lobby Shop. Listen to that. It's a great way to kind of learn what's happening inside DC from people who are there in and out. And his Substack's great too. So make sure to check that out. So I just think that was a good overview of where the race is, where we're headed, and sort of gives you an idea of sort of the state of things as we're here in the middle of September, heading into October, and trying to figure out where things are in November. Everybody expects the October surprise, some big event that's going to hit us. We already had 2 assassination attempts. Joe Biden was kicked out of the race and replaced by Kamala Harris. So there's been very big seismic changes in this race already. And, never say never, but obviously there could be some other shakeups in this race, but it's hard to see anything topping what we have now. I say that that we could have something that absolutely tops that. But if this race were to sort of even out a little bit here, when we start having these just earth shattering events every other week, you would expect sort of the gravity of this race to start reasserting itself, and that would benefit Donald Trump the closer we get to election day. Because a lot of this polling stuff is response level. You're getting a certain level of person responding to the polls that's more beneficial to Harris as opposed to Donald Trump. It's not really the shy Trump voter phenomenon. It's more of the who's sitting at home answering a telephone and being caught up in a poll. Right now, you're more likely to be a Harris supporter if you're doing something like that. So that's the overview of the race. I'm going to jump now into the actual polling. So here is the current state of the race in Real Clear Politics. This is all the latest polls in there. Their overall average has Harris with a +2 advantage right now nationally. This is up a little bit. The last time I was on here was around 1.5, so she's gained a little bit here. A lot of this is going to be post debate. So you've got everything basically after 9/11 here. The New York Post poll here was basically the first one that was out after the debate. So everything after here is generally pretty good for Harris. This New York Times Siena poll is one I wrote about a few times. It had Trump at +1. That is a critical poll for Trump because if this is accurate, then it's a doomsday scenario for Harris. And the reason a lot of people keep going back to it is because the New York Times Siena College poll is considered an A+ pollster. Another red flag here, as you're looking at all these different these results, and a lot of them are really good for Harris. You've got +4s and even a +6 here in the morning consult for her. The other red flag here is Atlas Intel. They were a very accurate 2020 pollster. In 2020, I went and pulled up their announcement of this. They had their final national level polling had Biden winning by 4.7 points. That was very likely one of the most precise polls in the entire election in 2020 because Joe Biden ended up winning by 4.5 points. So they were only off by 0.2. That's one of the more accurate pollsters that you're going to have there. So these are your red flags of your Harris. A very accurate pollster here and a very accurate pollster here gives you, Trump leaning data, but the rest of this is all generally going to be pro Harris. Another good one here is Fox News. That's Harris +2, and that's pretty much in lockstep with the Real Clear Politics. So all of this, you've got a lot of pro Harris polling in here, which is good for her. But even with all that, you average it all out, you're still looking at a +2 environment. So that's great for her. She's just still not where you would want to be. Nate Silver, as I've covered in the past, thinks she needs to be around 2.5. I'm more in the 3.5 range. I think that's where she needs to be in order to win. So we're still, if you're Harris and you're wanting to win, you want to be in a better position than what is being shown here. So this is the sort of the state of the race here. This is more post debate. This Fox News poll, the last day here, you got the assassination day that would have happened on the 16th. It's unclear how much that would have been factored into these results. So, the polling, the results are going to come in after the 16th. They're going to give us some idea of what's happening in the assassination time frame. But so we don't really have any of that data yet. But this all here, especially in the top half here, is going to be your post-debate stuff. So Harris did well in that. She generally won the debate. She's perceived to have won it, and that's being reflected on a lot of these polls. You've got some outliers here with some of the more accurate ones who are suggesting that it's not so rosy of a picture. So we'll see how that plays out as we get closer to election day. The other thing I wanted to cover here in Real Clear Politics is Tom Bevan. He put out this chart that I thought was really helpful where he compares 24, 2020, and 2016 across the national level and the swing states. So he did this a couple of days ago on the 16th. So the numbers have changed a little bit since then, but not by a lot. So you have on the national level, Harris was leading on the 16th. She was leading by 1.7. Comparatively, you've got Biden at 5.9, and you got Clinton here at +1.5. So in this one, you've got Harris running much closer to what Hillary Clinton was doing in 2016. In Wisconsin, Biden, as you'll note here, with the exception of Georgia, which ended up being wrong here, Biden had a clear lead in all of these states. He didn't win all of them. That included Florida here. Trump ended up winning there. But you see Biden leading across the board in all of these, and a lot of these were outside the margin of error. In 24, you've got a lot more sprinkled in results. So in Ohio, this is one where Trump's going to win outright, and he's going to win very large. Pennsylvania, you got Harris here at point one. That is far lower right here, and this is the critical state here, and you're down 4 at 6 points from where you were in the previous two cycles. So that's a very big change. That is a true toss-up. No one knows what's going to happen there. In Wisconsin, Harris is running well below where Biden and Clinton were doing at this stage. Wisconsin has been a very, very difficult state to poll. And I'm expecting a polling error in Wisconsin. It could go in either way, and it wouldn't shock me just because of how inaccurate some of the polling has been in Wisconsin. And if you're Harris and you're looking at this scenario here where Biden was leading by nearly 7 and Clinton was leading by 4, and you've only got around a 1 point lead, this is alarming. This is not where you want to be if you're Kamala Harris. Michigan is the interesting one this cycle. Obviously, Biden and Clinton both had strong leads here. Harris is struggling here because of a strong Palestinian supporting group in population within Michigan, and they are likely going to vote third party, at least according to some of these polls. The courts in Michigan have told Robert F. Kennedy Jr. that he's going to stay on the ballot. That is likely going to hurt Harris here. All third parties are likely going to hurt her in this state. Donald Trump's support is what it is, and anything that detracts from her is going to make it a harder road for her. And we're kind of seeing this in the numbers here. Trump's lead in Arizona is interesting, as in, it's very narrow in Nevada. These are both states that showed different polling in the previous two cycles. And then Florida, Georgia, North Carolina are likely going to be locks for Donald Trump. And you saw different polling in these states in the previous cycles. So what you're seeing almost uniformly, with the exception of the national level, you're seeing Kamala Harris run well below Biden's 2020 margins and either in line or below where Hillary Clinton was in 2016. So this is a very troubling trend if you're Kamala Harris. You have to pick up the pace and start expanding a lead here. And if you look at where we are right now in the battleground states, that's just not holding. You can sort of see here where you see her rise up in these battleground states. And effectively what happened is Democrats were ashamed of Joe Biden. They're excited to vote for Harris. So you're seeing this response issue here, switch, and now it's basically a tied race. So she has peaked more than likely in this race here. Let's zoom in here. And the interesting thing is, back around the end of August, you see Donald Trump sort of dip down, not by much, but it is lower by his standards where he's been. And he has risen back up in these polling averages, which has brought it down to a heat, where if you look across all of these, there's a 0.1 difference across all the battleground states, which is just razor thin. You're talking razor thin margins across the board. So this is one of those things where, any of these states could flip any direction or another. Pennsylvania is the big one. Whoever wins, that's going to win the race. And Harris has peaked. It looks like she's peaked right around in here and about a week ago in September. And now she's dipped back below 48%. I don't expect her to dip too far below that when in these averages of the battlegrounds, but it does show you that they are neck and neck when you're looking at all these together. 48, 47.8, and 47.9, that is just razor thin. And they're going to have to figure out, how they're going to find the margins and find everything else. Harry Enton at CNN did a piece on the number of undecided voters. In 2016, 10% of the population was undecided in the race. In 2020, that dipped to 8%. And in this race, only 4% of respondents in these polls are undecided. So shifting these margins here when they're only 4% undecided is going to be extremely, extremely hard for both campaigns. It's going to be like pulling blood or water from a rock, okay? Whatever metaphor you want to use. It's going to be very difficult to change these margins when only 4% of the population is undecided. So that's a situation where it's going to depend on who can get their base out the highest. because these types of margins are just, you're not going to be able to depend on the undecided voters to pull you across the finish line. So that's sort of the state of the overall race and the battleground states. Razor thin race across the board. Um, we can check here on Pennsylvania. You can see the .6 here. You've got a +2 for Trump here. Quinnipiac, that is a +5 for Harris. I would say right now, if you're Harris, I would chuck that one out the door. I would trust the Republican bolster here, insider advantage, more than I would ever trust Quinnipiac. They have some of the most interactive polling I've ever seen. They are some of the ones who show double-digit leads for Biden in some of these places like Wisconsin, and we're just bizarrely off. And so until you see these polls by Quinnipiac get better, I would not trust them. And they could say Trump was leading, they could say Harris is leading. It doesn't matter. I would not trust them whatsoever in any of these swing states. So that's an idea of some of the most important states. We're going to go now to a subgroup of these voters, which is the Teamsters vote. So the Teamsters announced amazingly that they are not going to endorse anyone for the U.S. president. Um, had they endorsed a Republican, it would have been the first time since '88 if they were to do so, but they're not endorsing anyone this cycle. They go through the reasoning here. There is a really, really interesting phrase that they use to describe what happened. So in the data, and I'm going to show you that, they first polled with it between Biden and Trump. In the Trump polling, where there was, he had Biden in the race, and this was in person with straw polls in April to July, they say he won that support there. But after Biden drops out, they switch to Harris. So they ran some independent electronic and phone polling from July to September. So this is a couple of months here. In those, a majority of those members selected Trump for both of them over Harris. So they wanted the Teamsters in both those electronic polls to choose Trump over Harris. So they said the union's extensive member polling showed no majority support for Vice President Harris and no universal support among the membership for President Trump. So there's two standards here. So no majority vote for Harris and no universal support for Trump. Now, what is the difference there? I couldn't really tell you. Let's just show you the numbers here. So these are the slides that the Teamsters put out showing you what happened. So first one is obvious here. They have Biden winning in their town hall straw polls. Now note here, Biden only has 44%. That's not universal support by my definition, but they claim that he won, and that was a result of those things. If you're just going with a majority thing there, fine. But remember, majority support and universal support. Biden had neither majority nor universal support in this poll, but they say he won. Next up, this is the first one that they ran between the July 24th and September 15th, an electronic poll with Harris on the ballot and Donald Trump. Trump is carrying nearly 60% of this vote. That is much larger than Joe Biden's numbers. It's a majority of Teamsters, and it is over that 50% line. So, but they said this is not universal, so they moved on and released another one. This one was done. This was a research phone call. So, in all seriousness, a phone call poll of your members is going to be more accurate because phone polls are widely considered to be the most accurate form of polling. So, live person phone interview, Donald Trump has an even bigger, larger margins here. So he is at 58% versus Harris at 31%. No majority support for Vice President Harris and no universal support for Donald Trump. So this is some of the most interesting language I've seen in a while. Most people, observing this said the Teamsters are one of the more conservative unions, so they weren't surprised. But remember, this is what they said Joe Biden won, and this is what they're saying that Donald Trump lost. So, if you are, Kamala Harris, and you're looking at this is an alarming number because it suggests that the rank and file union voters, which Harris is courting across the Rust Belt, are heavily leaning towards Trump, and by nearly 60%. This is not good if you're looking to swing white college working voters back to you, because in 2016, Joe Biden was legitimately brought a margin of these people back into the Democratic Party, and they voted for him over Donald Trump. And this could be one of those early examples where Kamala Harris may have higher excitement among Democratic voters, particularly on the coasts. But when you're getting into these rank and file union towns and union states, the working class is not siding with her in ways that are important. So, again, the Teamsters endorsed no one, even though their membership, by all the data that they have, suggests that their membership wants them to endorse Donald J. Trump. But they're not going to do that. So this is one of those interesting disconnects between a union's leadership versus the union's actual membership. Um, they're splitting in two different directions, and so they're not endorsing. So it's an interesting decision on their part. We'll see how this plays out in the swing states. If you're Democrat and you're trying to tout your union cred, this is not what you want to see. A non-endorsement is better than them endorsing Trump, but not by much, because this kind of undercuts the Democratic arguments that they are the ones of the working class. So that's where that stands. We'll see if that actually changes any votes. It does likely reflect, though, where the working class voters are in these states. Last thing I want to cover here before wrapping up is the Federal Reserve. They chose to cut rates in September by 50 basis points, or half a percentage point here. Um, this was a surprise to a lot of people. Most economists who were polled thought that there was only going to be a 25 basis points cut by the Federal Reserve. Everybody knew that a rate cut was coming because Jerome Powell had signaled as much in July. Nick Timiraos, who wrote this piece in the Wall Street Journal, had hinted for the last few weeks that a larger cut was coming. That did not sway the economy. It didn't sway what I kind of thought should have happened, and it didn't sway what most economists thought. So we're seeing the Federal Reserve run into the fray here and cut faster than expected by everyone. Now, this is going to make Wall Street happy because they're going to get lower rates, which is going to loosen up capital a little bit. So that could, in theory, juice markets. But the caution here, that if you're watching CNBC or any of the market channels, all pointed out, is that this also could signal that something worse is on the horizon, and that the Federal Reserve is jumping out in front of something. The last time we had a rate cut like this, it was September 18th, 2000, and it was either 7 or 8, where they started cutting, and that's when we were really dipping into the great financial crisis at that point. So it's not good when you're rhyming with that event, but that's where we are in this rate cycle. So this is something that bears watching moving forward, because it's unclear whether or not we have actually completed the fight against inflation. So over the next 3 to 6 months, if you see data coming in that is showing inflation at a hot level, that could signal that the Federal Reserve has to reverse course on this. Um, Conversely, if you see unemployment start going up even more, and again, inflation is out there, the Federal Reserve is going to have a tough decision ahead, because they do have a dual mandate. You'll hear them talk about that. Their dual mandate is that they have to focus on the unemployment rate and making sure the employment situation in the country is good, and they also have to focus on inflation. Inflation has been bad, so they've had to focus on that. Now they're trying to focus on both unemployment and the inflation rate. It's going to be real interesting if inflation sort of ebbs back up here, to see what they do. Do they try to bring rates back up in order to counter that? Or are they so worried about inducing a recession that they go ahead and let go of inflation and push things further along? No one knows the answer to that right now. You can go listen to CNBC or anybody else. Nobody knows. But it is going to be something that's going to impact the election, because as rates start to come down, it's going to impact things like your home mortgages, your car loans, and things like that. So people will see some impacts of this to their pocketbooks. It's just unclear how that's going to impact the race overall. Democrats are hoping that it benefits them because it loosens things up and hopefully helps the economy as we're heading into election day. Republicans see this as political meddling by the Fed. That this is a political decision. It's sort of a no-win situation for the Federal Reserve. Uh, It just sort of is what it is in their case. They've got to respond in one direction or the other. They don't have a choice because there are real threats on the horizon. They've got, the commercial mortgage space, which is going to have to start reassessing things here very soon. So there are real things on the horizon that the Federal Reserve is likely worried about. It's just unclear how bad it is and whether or not they see something on the horizon. If this is an instance like 2007 or 2008, where the Federal Reserve is trying to get out in front of a very bad situation that's developing, um, that bodes ill for both the country and the Democratic Party as we head into Election Day. If this just juices the stock market as we head into Election Day, that likely helps out Democrats. So we'll see how this plays out. But this is a very big decision being made in the middle of an election cycle where there's a lot of things impacting things. But this impacts, the number one issue for everyone is the economy and inflation. And this is going to be a big thing for everyone watching that. That's all I've got for tonight's show. If you got any thoughts, throw them in the comments. I'll try to get to them. And I will talk to you guys next time.